Good day, grade 12s of South Africa. Today we are starting human reproduction. And before you all get very excited, it's an exceptionally long section, very intricate. There are a lot of facts, and you are going to have to know all those facts to get any kind of marks. Also beware that a lot of your morals and values and the LO3s come through in this section as well. So it can be quite complex. Please make sure that you know all the facts, go from the basics and then move on to application, etc. All right, so when we look at reproduction, we start off with the male reproductive parts and the female reproductive parts. In our X sheet, it will be called the Saturday Extra 8 or number 8 X sheet. On there, you've got the male and the female reproductive systems, and then what we've done is we've given you a table, which is nice and easy to learn. Take the tables, reproduce them in your own colors, in your own handwriting. Get yourself a cheap packet of Cokies, and then discard the yellow completely. Draw the table in the black, and then do the structure versus the function and stick it up where you're going to look at it every day for the next week, and I promise you'll know the structures and the functions after that. All right, let's look at reproduction. Now, reproduction, all living organisms reproduce. Why do we reproduce? We reproduce to ensure that there is a next generation, and that is the continuation of a species. People, when you get to diversity, which is in module 4, you're going to find that it links quite a lot with genetics, and it links a lot with reproduction, because it is through reproduction that we are able to procreate. Now, every organism on this earth, our function is to procreate. And keep that in mind. We must procreate to ensure that the species is continued and that there is a continuation of life on this planet as we know it. Along the way, we have cell mutations, and those gene mutations that result in the cell mutations, those gene mutations, if they are good, they are passed on to the next generation because the organism survives. If the mutations are bad, they are called lethal mutations, and if they are lethal mutations, the organism will die. And if it dies, well, clearly it can't reproduce. And then we sometimes get neutral mutations, and those neutral mutations occur, but they sit there, and when conditions become favorable or the environment changes, those mutations could help us to survive, like, for example, sickle cell anemia. All right, so let's have a look at reproduction. Again, remember, it is for the continuation of the species. The only way to ensure that that species continues is through reproduction. Now, meiosis, we have covered in detail, and that is when a sexually mature adult or adults produce haploid gametes, and they join in a process called fertilization. So meiosis results in a haploid male gamete plus a haploid female gamete, and that then gives you a diploid zygote. The diploid zygote will then grow, and as it grows, it undergoes mitosis, not meiosis, mitosis. So meiosis creates the haploid gametes, the sex cells. They will fuse during fertilization, and the result is a diploid zygote that will undergo mitosis and develop into an embryo, and the embryo will then in a seed germinate when we plant the seeds, or in our bodies the embryo will then grow into a fetus, and we then give birth to live young because we are mammals. All right, fertilization, what do we have? It is where genetic material, now please take note, genetic material is combined to form a new organism. Any variations are going to be here within this genetic material and take place during prophase 1 of meiosis. Why? Because remember, that is where crossing over occurs, where we have a homologous set of chromosomes or homologous pair of chromosomes. What do we have? We have the male chromosome, from the father, the paternal chromosome, and from the mother, the maternal chromosome that sits in every one of our bodies. So that's our homologous chromosome. They have alleles, and the alleles are for specific traits. Now, during meiosis, or meiosis 1 during prophase, we have the chromosomes separate out, the chromosome pairs, and we then have a crossing over where parts of the paternal chromosome break off and the maternal chromosome breaks off, and they then join the other chromosome, so that we are combinations of our grandparents and our great-grandparents and our great-great-great-grandparents. All right, so we are combinations, and that ensures genetic variation. Very important, you must know that. So the genetic material is combined to form a new organism. Now, the male is haploid, as I've done there, and the female gamete is haploid, and it forms a diploid zygote. That diploid zygote is going to be 2N, and our cells are all diploid except for what happens in our reproductive organs. All right, and that applies to plants and animals, because remember, we have to do plant reproduction as well. So let's move on. The male reproductive system. First thing you must remember about the male reproductive system, girls and boys, is your male reproductive system joins and is part of also the urinary system. So therefore we call it the urogenital system. Males only have 2 openings, okay, at the bottom of their bodies. The one is the anus, which is for defecation. It's the end of the intestinal tract. And then they have one opening, and that one opening they will urinate through and they will pass sperm through. So that's why we call it the uro for urology, which is part of the urinary system, and genital because that is part of the reproductive system. So urogenital system. And remember, because urine passes through that same tube, through the urethra, which is part of the urinary system and the kidney system and the excretory system, you are going to have little traces of urine inside the urethra. So the reproductive system has to make sure that that is all neutralized and cleaned out before the little sperm pass through it. Otherwise, we are going to break and damage the little sperm. All right, so we'll get to that later. Here we get the side view of the male reproductive system. Now, in a test or an exam, they can give you either the frontal system or the side view, but your labels are going to be the same. I prefer the side view because you can see all the different structures better. So here we go. We start off with the kidneys, and we are going to have the ureter, which is going to be coming from a kidney over there. Then we have, in fact, I want to get a different color pen here, so let's do this. We then have the bladder. So the ureters pass into the bladder. You've done this in grade 11, into the bladder, and then the bladder, it will pass from the bladder out through the urethra, and that is what the male will urinate through. So remember, the urethra is actually very, very important because it is one tube for 2 functions. All right, we then have our reproductive system, and this is incredibly important. Something else you need to remember is that a male produces about 120 million sperm a day, and the sperm is there to ensure continuity of species. So that is why male sexual behavior is slightly different to that of a female sexual behavior. The male must get the sperm wherever it's got to go, which is to fertilize an egg cell. So they continually produce sperm until the day they die. Okay, and that is done in the testes, not the testicles, the testes. So let's look at all the biological terms. So we start off, first of all, with the testis. That's 1 testis, 2 testes. All right? The testes are encased in a bag or a sac which protects them, and it's made of skin, and it's called the scrotum. All right. Now, if we look at the testes, we're going to have the epididymis, and the epididymis is where the sperm are stored until they are released. They will then pass through the vas deferens, okay, and all the way up, and then they join the urethra. But before they do, the little sperm are flowing through here. They have to pick up fluid, which is going to help them to swim, because what is a little sperm's function, or sperm cell's function. It is to swim to the egg cell, so that when it gets to the egg cell will decide which of those millions of sperm that are released in one ejaculation, which one she, the little egg cell, is going to allow in. Because you only have one egg cell and one sperm cell that enters that egg cell, even with twins. Because when you have identical twins, one sperm cell enters the egg cell, and then mitosis occurs, and it will split into two eggs, okay, two fertilized eggs. That's why identical twins are always the same sex. All right, getting back to where we are now. You're going to have the little sperm cells moving from the epididymis up the vas deferens, all the way around, and then it picks up fluids from the different glands. So we've got the seminal vesicle. There are two, one on either side. Then, remember we're looking at a side view here. Then it goes into the ejaculatory duct, because we have ejaculation which is occurring now. Okay, it's going to pick up fluid from the prostate gland. And the prostate is actually a very important structure in male organs, or the male body, very important. Then we'll get to that. Then we get the carpus gland. There are two present, one on either side. And they all secrete various fluids, which we will go into just now. And that then passes out through the urethra and into the female. Males have what is called a foreskin. The foreskin is there to protect the head of the penis. All right, now, in certain religions and also certain groups of people, the foreskin is removed. That is called circumcision. And especially in certain groups, that circumcision becomes a rite, and it's a rite of way into adulthood. Now, with the foreskin being there, it protects the front of the penis, but it can also lead to health problems as well. And you have to have strict hygiene in order to make sure that that foreskin, underneath the foreskin, it is kept very clean. And in some cases, as I said, within people's beliefs and religious beliefs, they also decide to remove the foreskin for health reasons. All right, because it ends up being cleaner, but then there is argument that the penis then becomes desensitized, which is also a bit of a problem. So one has to weigh the one up against the other. It's not that one is correct and the other one isn't. And you may in an exam be asked, are you for or against circumcision, and why? You need to explain why. You can't just say, well, I think it's good or I think it's bad. You need to say why and base it on fact. All right, so let's just go through our labels again. We have the ureter, we have the seminal vesicle, the carpus gland, and the prostate gland. Those are the three very important glands. In between, you have the ejaculatory duct. Also from the bladder, joining into the ejaculatory duct, you have, that becomes the urethra. That's why it's called the urogenital process. Now, we also have the epididymis. This is where the sperm are stored until ejaculation occurs. Vas deferens, the sperm will travel up the vas deferens, and then it moves out through the ejaculatory tube and the urethra. There are two testes, but we talk about one testis. In other words, T-I-S, testis. And the two testes are encased within the scrotum, which is a bag of skin, which protects the testes. And then the foreskin, which is around the penis. All right, this structure here, you'll see it's shaded, so let's get a different color. Let's shade this in here. This tissue that I'm sort of shading is very important. It's called erectile tissue. And what erectile tissue does is when a male is sexually stimulated, there's a very, very good blood supply to the penis, and that erectile tissue becomes engorged. Now, engorged means to fill up. It becomes engorged with blood, and that's what causes the male erection. Now, with that erection, it literally closes off the part of the urethra that attaches to the bladder. So a male is incapable of urinating when he has an erection. And the reason for that is it's to safeguard the sperm cells, because they're on their way now towards sexual reproduction, because copulation is clearly occurring. Copulation is when the male inserts his penis into the female vagina. That would be copulation, to get the sperm to the egg cells. So you don't want urine in that whole process, because the urine, being acidic or very alkaline, acidic, depends on what you've eaten, is going to affect the sperm. So you don't want that. That is why males cannot urinate when they have an erection. It's the body's way of it's like when you bend a straw. It closes off the urethra section from the bladder. All right, moving along. We're now going to go through the function of the structures. People, you must know the structure versus the function. Have a look at the egg sheet. What we've done, as I said to you, we've given it to you in a table, and learn that table. It's the easiest, best way to learn it. So we have testes. Okay, there are 2 glandular testes or 1 testis. And you must get your terminology correct. Now, what are they responsible for? They're responsible for the production of the sperm. That happens inside the testes, all right? You also have the male sex hormone, testosterone. And testosterone is responsible for the secondary male characteristics. That will be the deeper voice. It will be the hairy body and pubic hair growing from everywhere, and facial hair. All of those are your secondary male characteristics. And it's because of testosterone that a male has these. That's why when women take testosterone as an anabolic steroid, they become more muscular, because a male is always more muscular than a female. But it also starts to reduce the woman's female hormones, because it almost inhibits those female hormones. And that causes other problems as well. So you'll find really women that take a lot of testosterone will have, instead of having hairless faces, they'll actually start to develop hair on their faces, and their voices will become deeper, etc., etc. So those are your secondary sexual characteristics. All right, now, each testis consists of the scrotal sac. Now, this is a bag of skin, and what it does is it encloses both the testes together. In the center of the 2 testicles, you'll find that there's almost a ridge or a join of the scrotum as the 2 halves join in the middle. All right, the bag hangs outside the abdominal cavity to regulate the temperature of the testes. Now, this is incredibly important. The sperm cells are produced at 35 degrees Celsius, but our body temperature ranges between 36.5 and 37.5 degrees Celsius. So we say our average body temperature is approximately 37 degrees. So that is why, there are various sayings, but when it gets very cold, what the scrotum will do is that the slight, very thin layer of muscle will contract, and the scrotum pulls the testes closer to the abdominal cavity to warm the testes up. And when it's very hot, the muscles will relax, and the testes will hang further away from the body, so that they're also around the testes, there are a lot of sweat glands, so that there's a lot of moisture or sweat to cool the testes down when the body temperature is very high. And that is to keep the body temperature of the temperature of the testes at 35 degrees Celsius. So generally 2 degrees lower than the normal body temperature. So they have a very important function in that they protect the testes, and secondly, they assist in regulating the temperature and keeping it at 35 degrees Celsius, which is optimum sperm producing temperature. So scrotal sac can contract into the body when it is cold, okay, to increase body temperature, or to relax and hang further away from the body when the temperature is high, so that it can ensure that temperature of 35 degrees, because that is an optimal sperm producing temperature. all right? Then there's seminiferous tubules. Now, the testes consist of approximately 1,000 seminiferous tubules. People look at the word. Sema is to make sperm, because semen is the liquid that carries the sperm. So semen is all the fluids from the glands plus little sperm cells. So seminiferous tubules. And these tubules are lined with germinal epithelium. When we get to gametogenesis and spermatogenesis, we're going to go through this in detail. But here are the basics. You have this germinal epithelium. Now think of the word germinal, to germinate. That means for a seed to grow. So this is where your sperm cells are produced, by the germinal epithelium. Very important, you have the cells of Leydig, or the Leydig cells. And what do? They're located between the germinal epithelium, and their function is to produce testosterone. And testosterone is what a male needs. Now you've got pre-hormones or precursors to the hormone release, and that, which is called luteinizing hormone, and that is going to help produce your Leydig cells to then produce testosterone. Your deepest layer of the germinal epithelium contains the spermatogonia. And the spermatogonia are your main sperm cells, and also the cells of Sertoli. Now, let's look at what these cells do. The Leydig cells produce the hormone testosterone, as I've already said. You've got the spermatogonia at this point are diploid. And what do we want? We want them to be haploid, because our sperm cells are haploid, which means that the spermatogonia have not undergone meiosis yet. So, during spermatogenesis, you're going to have haploid spermatozoa. Now, spermatozoa is a long word, and it means the same thing as sperm cells. So, rather write sperm cells than risk misspelling spermatogonia and coming out with some strange word. But spermatogonia and sperm cells, same thing. All right, then your cells of Sertoli, what do? They provide nutrition for those little sperm cells to grow. So your Leydig cells produce the hormone testosterone, and your cells of Sertoli produce food for your sperm cells, or nutrition for the sperm cells. Now we have the vas efferentia. Now that sounds very fancy. All it is, it's a structure that passes the sperm to the epididymis, all right? And the epididymis stores those little sperm cells until they are mature. So they're produced in the seminiferous tubules. From there, they move into the vas efferentia, and the vas efferentia then deposits these little sperm cells into the epididymis. And the epididymis then stores the sperm cells, about 500 million sperm cells, and not just 500 million, 500 million sperm cells, look at this people, per cubic centimeters, and there is 6 meters of the epididymis. So there are a massive amount of little sperm cells being stored. Please also understand, or try and get it in your heads, how tiny the little sperm cell is. If you were to look with just your eyes or just a pair of reading glasses, you would not be able to see a sperm cell. Okay, you cannot see it. It is too small. They are 2.5 micrometers wide and 4 or 5 micrometers long. That's it. They are tiny, 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 tiny. So vas efferentia collects the sperm and deposits it into the epididymis, and the epididymis is about 6 meters long, and it stores 500 million sperm cells. So until the sperms mature, and they are now able to swim, to be ejaculated, and to swim to the egg cell for reproduction to occur. Now, from the epididymis, it's going to go into the vas deferens. Don't confuse the two. All right, the vas efferentia transfers the sperm to the epididymis. Remember, it's vas efferentia with an E, and it deposits into the epididymis, so the 2 E's link. And remember it that way so you don't confuse it. Whereas the vas deferens, this tube connects each testis to from the epididymis to the urethra. So the vas deferens, these spermies are now on their way out. Okay, so the efferentia links to the epididymis to the vas deferens. You are deferring those sperm out of the body, if you remember it that way. Okay, the entrance of the tube is located just after it leaves the bladder, and that is very important. That is why we have the urogenital structure, because you've got the urethra, which is the pathway out for sperm, and it's the pathway out for urine. So vas efferentia to the epididymis, and the epididymis stores these sperm until they mature, and from the epididymis it goes to the vas deferens. We're deferring the sperm out of the body. Then we have the seminal vesicles. Now, we're going through the glands. These are your glands, okay? The first of our glands, let's give him a nice green highlight, and the prostate gland, a nice green highlight. But you've got your seminal vesicles, and that is a short glandular tube that secretes mucus and a watery alkaline fluid. And that fluid contains, the most important thing is fructose. And I've actually bolded it. Now, what does fructose do? It is absolute energy. That's what it is. You get fructose as a monosaccharide, okay? And you've got three monosaccharides. You've got glucose, fructose, galactose. Galactose you get from milk. It's milk sugar. And then you get glucose, as just about any carbohydrate contains glucose. And then you have fructose. And fructose is fruit sugar, and it is immediate, instant energy. So what happens is the mitochondria are going to convert, or will convert, in the sperm cells, because they've got lots of mitochondria. Why? Those little sperms have to move, and in order to move, they must have energy, which is in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. All right, so this fructose is so that the mitochondria in the sperm cells can convert it into energy. Energy is ATP, okay, for those little sperm cells. This secretion flows into the ejaculatory duct during ejaculation. So remember, we're going to go from the vas deferens, becomes the ejaculatory duct. And as it gets into that ejaculatory duct, first set of fluid we're going to have from the seminal vesicles. And the most important part is that it contains fructose, and that provides the ATP, the energy for the sperm to swim. All right, then we move on to the prostate gland, and what the prostate gland does is it secretes mucus mixed with a slightly alkaline fluid as well, and it's released during ejaculation. Now what it does is it increases the motility, which is the ability to move, the motility of the sperm, but the most important function of the prostate gland's fluid is that it neutralizes any possible acidity in the vagina. And we don't want either the urethra in the male or the vagina in the female to be acid. We don't. We want it to be as close to neutral as possible. Okay, for otherwise the sperm cells will be harmed, and we don't want that. So the prostate gland secretes a mucus mixed with a slightly alkaline fluid, and what does it do? Its main function is to neutralize any possible acidity in the vagina, guys and girls. All right, now our third gland that we're going to look at is our carpus gland. And the carpus gland says, right, we need to make sure, now we've neutralized, we've got food for the sperm, okay, from the seminal vesicles. We're neutralizing the female's vagina, okay, to make sure that that it isn't too acid so that it messes things up with those little sperm. But now we have to make sure that the male's urethra is neutralized, and that is from the carpus gland, because there you have an alkaline fluid as well, and it neutralizes the urethra. So it makes sure that any kind of urine residue, that urine residue is completely neutralized. Otherwise, those poor little sperm don't have a chance. Okay, so the bodies, your body, my body, male, female bodies, what they do is they are absolute dead set on reproducing and procreating and making sure there is a next generation. Okay, people, so just focus on that. Seminal vesicles produces fructose. The and I've just gone blank. See, this is what happens when you talk too much. Seminal vesicles, fructose, the prostate gland to neutralize the fluids in the vagina, and we have the carpus gland, which says, we got to neutralize the male as well. So we neutralize the urethra to make sure that there is no urine residue. If there is, it is neutralized. Okay, then we get to the penis. Now the penis is very important. Why? It is the structure that's going to ensure that the sperm are deposited from the male reproductive system to the female reproductive system. And so that there is no chance of anything getting in the way and destroying the sperm cells. That is the function of the penis. All right, so what does it have? It has erectile tissue, okay? And that erectile tissue clearly surrounds the urethra, which is the opening or the tube through which the sperm are going to come. Now, during sexual stimulation, I've explained this to you, you're going to have an incredible blood flow because there are a lot of blood vessels into the erectile tissue, causing this penis to become erect. And only when it is erect does it shut off the bladder so that there is no possibility of urinating during ejaculation, all right? And it is also able then to be inserted into the female so that the sperm can flow up through the uterus or through the cervix, into the uterus and into the fallopian tubes, because fertilization occurs in the female's fallopian tubes, which we're going to cover now. All right, into the vagina during sexual intercourse. Sexual intercourse is also called copulation. All right, I'm going to just write it in here for you. In case you get this term in exams, you'll know what it means. Copulation. That is the act of sexual intercourse, copulation. Now, the semen is a combined name. It's one name for lots of things in that fluid. The semen is your sperm and the fluid that you are going to get from the seminal vesicles and the carpus gland and the prostate gland. Is ejaculated. Ejaculated means to be taken, to be pushed out, ejaculated into the vagina. All right, now, here are a couple of questions that you could have in an exam. This exam is taken from one of the exam papers, and I can't quite recall which one, but it's one of your final examination papers for the National Senior Certificate. Here we start. Study the diagram below and answer the questions that follow. First thing you do when you get a diagram, and come on people, by now you should know this process, is you label the diagram. Before you've even looked at the questions, except you've read through your paper before you started, but before you look at those questions again, you label your diagram. So, label number 1. Now let's have a look here. That tube is going from here and it's going up to the urethra, so we know that 2 is the urethra. So number 1 is going to be the epidermis. All right. Number 3 is going to be the penis. Number 4 is the testis. Why not testes? Because you're only looking at one of them. And when you look at any diagram, that is the left side, the right side, and this is the left side, because it's as if you are looking at a human being lying in front of you. All right, so this here would be the right testis, and this would actually, perfectly correct, would be the left testis, but testis is fine. And then 5 is the scrotum. All right, so provide labels for 1 to 5. We've done that. Okay. Where are the testes? Now, testes, we're talking about both of them, located at the time of birth. They are going to be in the scrotum. Now, in some cases, at birth, the little boys, there are muscles around the top of the testes, and the testes will be out of the body. But sometimes the testes aren't released. And the doctors will then watch after 2 or 3 days. They will expect at the very latest for the testes to come or be released out of the body. If not, they have a little operation and that releases the testes out of the body. But they'll be inside the scrotum, right up against the body. All right, describe the seminiferous tubules. Now, the seminiferous tubules, remember, we've gone through. And if we have to describe the seminiferous tubules, this is what you will write. We'll say that they are coiled, always coiled tubules, which means you have an increased surface area. They are coiled tubules containing 2 types of cells. All right, and those 2 types of cells are going to be your spermatogonia and the cells of Sertoli. I always want to spell Sertoli with 2 L's, but it's 1 L. So the cells of Sertoli. So you have to say what it is and the fact that those seminiferous tubules contain 2 lots of cells. Okay, why is it, let's just move this up. Why is it necessary for the male to produce such a large quantity of sperm cells? Well, guess what? The sperm cells leave the body, okay? And the fact that they leave the body, many may die. Oh, what am I doing? Many may die. And if they are going to die, we now have a problem. So therefore, many are produced to ensure that fertilization will take place. People, just think about how much pollen there is at springtime. You're always going to produce many male gametes. Why? And all organisms do. Many male gametes because they do not stay inside a structure like the ovary and the uterus where they are protected. They're going to leave the body. So the male body will make sure that there are lots of them so that fertilization can occur and at least one sperm cell survives. Name one function of the epididymis. Now, we've done the epididymis 3 or 4 times. Now, in the last, I don't know, 5 minutes or 10 minutes, main function is the storage of the male sperm cells until they are mature. That's where they sit. The vas efferentia takes them to the epididymis until they are mature. And when they are mature, they will then go into the vas deferens and out of the body. All right. Why is it important that the testes are located outside of the abdominal cavity? It is to regulate the temperature for sperm production at 35 degrees Celsius. Okay, then name the 3 glands of the male reproductive system and provide a function for each. Okay, first one we're going to have is the seminal vesicles. All right, and what do they release? They release a fluid which contains fructose for ATP for sperm cells. Okay, that is the most important. It helps those sperm cells. It's the fructose for them to move. Okay, that's the seminal vesicles. Then we have the prostate gland. And what does the prostate gland do? Remember, it's going to make sure that we neutralize the female. So it's going to, it has a slightly alkaline, what's wrong here? I'm spelling like an idiot. Let's just fix this nicely. Alkaline fluid. And what does it do? It neutralizes any acid in the vagina. Okay? And also, it's going to help assist movement of sperm cells. So you could give any one of those two. And then that's the prostate gland, and then we look at the carpus gland, or glans. And the carpus glands are going to secrete alkaline fluid to neutralize urine residue in the male urethra. Okay, so seminal vesicles, fructose, energy for the sperm to move. The prostate gland, slightly alkaline fluid. It's got a fluid, so it's going to help the sperm to move, but it's also going to help to neutralize any acidity in the vagina. And the carpus glands, alkaline fluid to neutralize any urine residue in the male urethra. Okay, then we have our last question. What does the term semen refer to? Now, semen, okay, is not people that go out to sea. Semen here is going to be sperm cells, okay, and it's going to have your fluid from the carpus glands, the prostate gland, and lastly but not least, the seminal vesicles. And that fluid is going to be slightly alkaline, contain fructose, and mucus. And all of that protects the little sperm and helps them, it assists them to swim, because sperm cells are motile. Motile means they're able to move. Okay, now we go to the female reproductive system. And ladies, the female reproductive system, very important. You need to know what goes on in your body and why your body works the way it does. The same as men need to understand, or males need to understand how their body works and what all those structures are for. And then, of course, males need to know the female body and females need to know the male body, so that you both understand how everything works and why it works the way it does. Okay, female reproductive system. This is the front view. Why? Because we can actually see better on a front view. I prefer the male side view and the female front view. So here we go. We have the fallopian tubes which come off. So let's start with the kidneys. Here we have kidney and a kidney. Here the ureters. The ureters take the fluid or the urine into the bladder where it is stored, and the female has a separate opening called the urethra. Okay, then the female also, which is not shown on this diagram, has the anus just like a male. But where in the male you have a urogenital system, where the urethra is for the reproductive system as well as the urine, in the female, we have 3 openings. We have the anus, and then there is the urethra, which is from the kidneys and the bladder, and the urine is passed through the urethra out of the body. And then there is the vagina, and the vagina is the reproductive part of the female system. So kidneys, which is the excretory system, you have the kidneys or the urinary system, you have the ureters, 2 of them, into the bladder where the urine is stored, and that passes out of the body via the urethra. Now, with regard to the reproductive system, let's get a purple color here for us girls, and we say, right, starts off first of all with the ovaries. There is one ovary there, and here is another ovary here. This is the fallopian tube. We have 2 fallopian tubes sitting around the fallopian tubes, which we can't draw because it's too small, but sitting here there are little structures there called fimbriae. And what the fimbriae do is they're right on the edge of the fallopian tubes, and they make wave-like motions. And what that does is when ovulation occurs and the ovary releases the little egg cell, those fimbriae make wave-like motions, and they pull the egg into the fallopian tube. All right, so you have fimbriae on that side and also on this side. Then from the ovary, we go into the fallopian tubes, also called the oviducts. It will depend on what textbook you're using. Fallopian tubes, it's a term I like, even though it's a little bit more complicated to spell, but any textbook you use, whether it's American, whether it's English, whatever, it's always going to call it fallopian tubes. So fallopian tubes, the common name, and the fallopian tubes run along here. So there's a fallopian tube there, and there's a fallopian tube over there. All right. Then the fallopian tubes lead into this structure here, which is, they say it's pear-shaped. It doesn't really look pear-shaped, but it's pear-shaped, and in a textbook anyway. And this here is the uterus. All right, so the uterus over here, and the uterus is made up of the endocardium and the myocardium. And the pericardium would be the outside. Okay, metrium, not cardium. What am I talking about? The heart, metrium. So your perimetrium is on the outside. Then you have the myometrium, which is the muscle layer, and the muscle layer of the uterus is very strong. Think about it. When a woman has contractions to push a baby out, the baby has grown. The baby grows in the uterus. That uterus has to expel that baby. And those muscles are incredibly strong. So that myometrium, myo means the muscle layer. And then the endometrium is the inner layer. And that endometrium is richly supplied with blood vessels so that if fertilization does occur, then the placenta links in over there and the baby can be fed properly. All right. So that is also why when that lining tears away, it is the endometrium that tears away from the perimetrium, at least the myometrium, and that's why there is bleeding that takes place, all right, during menstruation. Then we have at the end of and I've just gone blank, the end of the uterus, sorry, here you are going to find the cervix. And the cervix also, it's tiny, it's just a little hole, because all it does is it allows the sperm through into the uterus and to the fallopian tubes. All right, and then clearly this section here that's been drawn here, let's use green and highlight it. This here would be the vagina. So the vagina also has mucous membrane so that it does become moist, which aids in sexual intercourse or copulation. It has slight folds in it as well, and it's a nice dark warm place as well. So that also creates issues which we will do later on in this section of work. Okay, so it's the vagina leads through the cervix into the uterus, and each uterus linking to it, you have the fallopian tubes or oviducts, and then the ovaries are separate structures they release the egg, and that gets sucked into the fallopian tubes by fimbriae. All right, that is the female reproductive system. Now, if we look at structure versus function, as we did with the males, we start off with the ovaries. Now, ovaries are almond-shaped. They're very small, and they are within our abdominal cavity, which is nice because our reproductive system as females, everything is nicely, comfortably protected here in the abdominal cavity, and it's protected by our pelvic bones, and at the back, sorry, by the sacrum. All right. Nicely protected. Why? Because that's where the baby is going to grow, so it must be protected, where the male has it outside his body. Also, that's another reason why in the male reproductive system there are a lot of nerve cells there to make sure that the penis and the testicles are well protected. Whereas in the female, there is less sensitivity because everything that's worthwhile sits within the pelvic area. All right, so we have two almond-shaped ovaries. The outer layer of the ovaries consists of, there we go, our germinal epithelium again. It's the germ tissue. Why? It produces the egg cells. Then ovaries produce the sex hormones estrogen. Now, we say estrogen, but it's written oestrogen. And just remember, this O is for ovulation. Okay. So O, ovulation, estrogen. And progesterone, remember the P is for pregnancy. And that will be far clearer to you once we get to gametogenesis and oogenesis and spermatogenesis. Just remember the P for pregnancy and the P for progesterone. And oestrogen and ovulation. All right, when the female matures sexually, an egg is produced each month and released during ovulation. Every now and again, you're going to have both ovaries releasing an egg, and that, if they are fertilized, that results in your unidentical or paternal twins. And they can be the same sex, they can be different sexes, they can look similar, or like brothers and sisters, but they never look identical. Okay. Whereas when you have maternal twins, that's when one egg cell accepts one sperm cell and then undergoes mitosis, so the cells are identical. Okay, fallopian tubes. Now, the fallopian tubes, remember, they come in across like that, and they then come into the uterus. So here are your fallopian tubes. And you have this sort of opening area over here. That's where your fimbriae are going to be, almost like a little cup shape. Now, a tube that connects each of the ovaries to the uterus. The ovary end has feather-like cilia called fimbriae. That's the ovary end of the fallopian tubes. It's there. And your fimbriae cause a current to pull the eggs into the fallopian tube once it's released by the ovary, because the ovary sits about here, and it's going to release the little egg cell here, and that will then get sucked in, and the same process will occur this side. Little ovary releases the egg cell, and it's sucked in. Peristalsis, now this is also important, people, you must know. It is peristaltic contractions. Now, you did peristalsis when you did the movement of food through, first of all, down the esophagus and also through the small intestine. You are going to have peristaltic movements. So peristalsis, peristaltic contractions, and also little cilia, these are little hairs, will move the egg down along the fallopian tubes towards the uterus. Fertilization and the first 8 stages of mitosis will take place in that fallopian tube. All right, so sometimes the fertilized egg doesn't get moved down, and that's when we end up with a tube pregnancy, or what we term a tube pregnancy. But that means that the little egg then grows and grows and grows by mitosis, and it can cause the fallopian tube to burst, but it is incredibly painful. So that's just every now and again there's a bit of a mix-up in the processes, and the egg then starts to grow in the fallopian tube. All right, the uterus. It is hollow, it is muscular, and they say pear-shaped, although I don't know, it's a very, very strange pear shape because it looks like that. I'm not sure how that ends up being pear-shaped, but the textbook says it's pear-shaped. You learn it's pear-shaped. It's about 7.5 centimeters long and about 5 centimeters wide. So people, your uterus is not the thing that's this size. A uterus is small. I mean, it's you can almost say the size of a fist. All right, it's a small structure, 5 centimeters by 7.5 centimeters. It's inside the pelvic cavity, so it's in here. Okay, the uterus has 3 distinct regions, and you must know these regions. First of all, you have the fundus, which is the main middle section. It's the section here. That's your fundus area there. Then you have the body, which is your middle section, and then you have the cervix, which is at the end. So the uterus, the fundus, near the fallopian tubes, the body, which is the middle wider portion, and then the cervix. And this is a very narrow area, and it's the opening between the vagina and the uterus. And we've got to make sure that that is protected. During pregnancy, there'll be a mucus plug that develops in the cervix to prevent anything from going anywhere near this developing fetus inside the uterus. Now, the muscular wall of the uterus consists of 3 layers, not cardium like I said just now, because cardio is anything to do with the heart. The heart also, and you've also done the heart also has 3 layers. It has the pericardium, the myocardium, and the endocardium. So we've got the same here, except it is metrium. So the perimetrium, peri always means outside. Think of a periscope, which you use in a submarine to look out on top of the water. Peri means outside. Myo means muscle. So it's the middle layer, which consists of smooth muscle. Now, you've done the different types of muscle tissue. Come on, do you remember? And your smooth muscle makes up your organs. All right, it's not controlled by the will. It is not like skeletal muscles where you control what you want to do with your skeletal muscles. Smooth muscle cannot be controlled. Okay, so smooth muscle, mainly organs and glands are made of smooth muscle, which contracts during childbirth. These contractions are not regulated by your skeletal system. They are regulated by your hypothalamus and a hormone called oxytocin. And oxytocin is what causes the onset of the contractions to push the baby out in childbirth. The endo means inside, it's the inner layer. The endometrium consists of a lot of glands, and it has a very, very, very good blood supply. And this layer breaks away during menstruation, because what the body does is it, from the last day of menstruation, the lining of and we'll do this when we do hormonal control in females, but the lining starts to build, and it prepares in case an egg cell is fertilized. And if that little egg cell is fertilized, there's got to be a nice protected place with lots of blood supply to that egg cell so that it can receive its nutrition and so that it can grow. Well, it won't be an egg cell, it's going to be a zygote, a diploid zygote. So it must have a place to settle in and be there so that it can develop. All right, and that is what the uterus does. It prepares this wonderful place for this little egg to sit, and the egg cell, once it's fertilized, to grow into a new being. So that's all the preparation. And then what happens? If fertilization doesn't occur, well, the lack of hormones, just the lining says, oh, well, didn't make it this month, failed again, and it starts to tear away. And when it tears away, that is what menstruation is. And that is why females bleed. It's about a cup of blood, which is about 250 milliliters of blood, is lost over a 3 to 5 day period while that lining tears away. And then everything is all nice and fresh, and the lining, it's all then has to start being built again. So the menstruation cycle is normally 28 days, and it starts on the first day of menstruation. So by day 5, that lining is gone. Now the body works at building a new lining, just in case a little egg cell is fertilized and we have a new little diploid zygote that's going to want to find a nice, warm, protected place to start growing. If fertilization doesn't occur, the lining tears away, and so the cycle occurs. All right, it's this endometrium that is going to be tearing away. So let's move on. The vagina. The vagina, clearly a muscular tube. It's got to be muscular because those muscles stretch during childbirth. And they also, by the way, dilate, which means they get wider. They dilate during copulation or sexual intercourse. So the muscular tube, it's about 8 to 10 centimeters long. It has elastic tissue, very important, and a folded lining. The tissue secretes mucus so that everything is nicely lubricated to ensure that there is lubrication during intercourse, copulation, sexual reproduction. The vagina connects the external part to the uterus. Remember, there's a cervix in between. So you have the vagina, you have the cervix, and then the uterus. The idea is to get the sperm cells through the cervix to the uterus, where the sperm cells will then swim up into the fallopian tubes, and if there is an egg, fertilize the egg cell. The vagina connects the external part to the uterus. Okay, the vagina stretches, people, during sexual intercourse when the penis is inserted. All right, it will also stretch during childbirth. Sometimes if the baby is, what is then called a fetus, during childbirth, if that baby is too big and the muscles can't stretch enough, they will actually tear. But then the gynecologist will stitch the person up, the female up, and they will stitch any tears that are there. The only problem is it leaves scar tissue. So the next pregnancy, if she tears again, she won't tear on that scar tissue, she will tear next to it. So, because remember, wherever you have scar tissue, it's sort of almost super reinforcing. So that causes other issues, but we'll get to that when we do the childbirth section. So the vagina stretches during sexual intercourse and also during childbirth, because remember, the vagina forms part of the birth canal. The baby has to come through that. Then we have the clitoris. It's a small structure in the front of the vagina, and it also becomes stimulated during sexual intercourse, and when it becomes stimulated, it also has a slight erection. All right, now, here's a nice question for you. It is something that is quite probable in the exams. Remember, you are going to, in a final exam, you're going to get multiple choice questions. You're going to get match column A and B, provide the correct biological terms for. All right, so you need to know this. Here we go, match column A with the statements in column B. The first thing you do is read your options here, and then as you read through these terms over here, you link them up. So let's look at how we're going to do it. We say, right, we have a uterus, we have a fallopian tube, testis, the cervix, the ovary, the corpus luteum, the primary follicle, the cells of Sertoli, the epididymis, and the penis. All right? So here are our options. First one, the external opening of the vagina. Well, sure, it's going to be not anything that we have here. So let's look. We're looking for the uterus. So the release of the egg cell during ovulation, definitely not the uterus. Production of the hormone testosterone, definitely not. That's a function of the testes. Then development of the fetus. Development of the fetus takes place there. There we go. That's the uterus. So we write D. Then cross this one out so you know you don't have to look at it again. All right, now fallopian tube, we're looking for something to do with the fallopian tube. Now just having remembered what we've read there, it's not anything there. So develops into the Graafian follicle, no. Organ closed by the scrotum, no. That would be a testis. So while we're at it, we can say that's F. So we can take this out. We're still looking at fallopian tube. Secretes progesterone, no. Provides nutrition, definitely not. Deposits sperm, no. Transports egg cells from the ovary to the uterus, there we go. So there's the function of the fallopian tube. And this is exactly the process you are going to follow in an exam situation. All right, now we're looking at the cervix. And what does the cervix do? Well, it's none of those that we've read through there. Region in the female that separates the vagina and the uterus, there we go. So there's the cervix. So we can take the cervix out. All right, ovary. Now we want to look at the ovary. Well, produced by carpus. It was here somewhere. It's got nothing to do with sperm. Ah, there we go. The ovary releases the egg cells during ovulation. So this would be B. The corpus luteum. Now, we haven't done the corpus luteum to now, so you're not going to know it. Well, it was none of these here, but just by looking, it's going to be the structure that releases progesterone. So I'm going to tell you this because you would have battled because we haven't done this section of work yet. Okay, then we're looking at the primary follicle. The primary follicle will be, it develops into the Graafian follicle. This would have been another problem for you because we haven't done this section of work, but they've incorporated here as one question. Then our cells of Sertoli, it's right next to it. They provide the nutrition for the sperm cells, and we've covered this today, so there we go. Then the epididymis. Now, it's not the external opening to the vagina because it's got nothing to do with a female. So this one here we can take out because we are left with two options, epididymis and penis, and they are both male structures. Okay, so we need to look at, doesn't produce the hormone testosterone. Let me just see here. Provides nutrition for the sperm cells, no. Deposits the sperm, no. Produced by the corpus gland, definitely not. It's the region where sperm cells mature before release. There we go. And there's our M. All right, and then the last one, the penis. What is the penis's job? People right here, deposits sperm into the female. So that would be I. All right, so there you go. Quick 10 marks, and you say 10 marks. Thank you for coming. Okay, we have one question left, and let's see. It says, study the diagram below and answer the questions that follow. Here we have a female reproductive system. The reason I chose this question is because it's exactly the diagram I gave you. All right, first we label. Always rule number one, first we label. So let's label. That would be the kidneys. And it's both kidneys, so don't just write kidney, it's the kidneys. Okay, then 2 is the ureter, and it's not ureters because it's not pointing to both, only to one. So it's the ureter. Then number 3, those are our fallopian tubes. And 4 is the infundibulum. And the infundibulum is the entrance to the fallopian tube. All right, 5 is our little ovary. 6 is the vagina. 7 is the fundus. Remember, it's the top part of the uterus, so that's the fundus. 8 is going to be the outside, so it's going to be, I would put it as the perimetrium. It's the outside of the uterus. 9, cervix. 10 is the bladder. 11 is the bladder. 10, well, it's grouping all of these together, so that would be the uterus. All right, there are our labels. Now we've got our labels done. So we move on to our next question. It says, supply the labels for parts 1 to 11. We've done that. And then it says here, oh, what am I doing? Name one function for each of the parts 3, 5, and 7. So 3, 5, and 10. So let's go back. 3 was the fallopian tubes. Let's just check our 5 is the ovary. And 10 is the uterus. Now, you wouldn't have to flick back like that because you would have given all your labels over here. So, what is the function of the fallopian tubes? It transports the egg cells from the ovary to the uterus. You could also have said fertilization takes place inside the fallopian tube because that's a function of the fallopian tube as well. So I think let's put it here. We put a backslash. Don't do this in an exam. Don't give more than one answer if only one answer is required. Okay? But site of fertilization. Okay. The ovary, what is the ovary's function? People, the ovary's main, only, most important function is going to be to produce egg cells. That's why we have ovaries. That's the job, to produce egg cells. The uterus, what is the uterus's job? It supplies, or it is the region where an embryo will develop. It doesn't matter that menstruation occurs there. It does nothing. What the uterus does, its main function is to provide a nice, warm, dark, nutritious, well supplied with blood place for the little embryo to grow, to protect that embryo, to make sure that life is created. All right, people. So that's it for today. We have now covered the male reproductive system. We've covered the female reproductive system. And from here, we are going to move on to gametogenesis. Genesis means to create. It's the beginning of life. And gameto, gametes. So in males, spermatogenesis. In females, it is oogenesis. We're going to go through that, and then we're going to go through hormonal control of spermatogenesis and gametogenesis. And then we're going to do the whole fertilization process and the development of that baby inside the uterus. And do yourselves a favor, if you have access to internet, go and have a look at various pictures that you'll find on the internet of the fetus as it develops. And I think for those of you that are, you want to see how this baby develops, it's amazing to see how much it's developed after 2 months. In other words, 8 weeks. Go and have a look. Do yourselves a favor. But at the end of the day, this is it for today. So work hard. Remember, what you put in is what you're going to get out at the end of the year. I hope you've learned a lot today. And if you've got this under your belt, well, we move on to the next section. Check your X sheets. It's got all the information you need to know. So learn what's on that X sheet and you'll be ready to rock. Have a good one. Until I see you next time, be good. Bye-bye.